Welcome to the HabitStack Podcast, where we talk to fellow founders who are in the thick of things as they execute their plans to grow their business. Because stories about past successes are interesting, but hearing from people who are in the middle of the battle right now, that's invaluable. I'm Scott Ward, founder of HabitStack. I am here today with Dr. Renee Fraser, CEO of Fraser Communications. Renee, I'm delighted to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Scott. I'm happy to be here.
So I have a bunch of questions for you. But before we do that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're up to in this world?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Boy, I'm excited to be in these changing times. I think we're in a whole new era and going through a transformation. I run an advertising and marketing firm. As you said, my name is Renee Fraser. I'm a psychologist. I have a PhD in social psychology. So I love studying the mind and what people's behavior is, particularly applying it to marketing. I run a full-service advertising agency. It's over 25 years old, and we work with a broad set of clients doing digital marketing and fully integrated marketing with all types of owned, earned, shared media. And I'm very happy to talk more about that, as well as the insights that we develop, what we're seeing in consumer behavior for the purpose of branding, as well as for guiding sales through the funnel.
So do you do not just digital marketing, or offline as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
really
cool.
important. We actually see when you run digital ads with another vehicle, like a reach vehicle, which would be outdoor or radio, you get a lift in the
Right.
digital. So we create, through the funnel, if you will, awareness, consideration, and then the close. And we know which media works in which places. So we give fully integrated plans to our clients. Sometimes it's bottom of the funnel. Sometimes it's awareness building. And we're experts in what's right at the right time and what are the kinds of messaging that will work for the brand.
I imagine that your background in social psychology, you referenced this, but it's fairly useful in what you do in
Yes.
marketing.
Yes.
What do you think? Are there any things that the layman, people who aren't in marketing, or maybe even and also don't have a degree in social psychology, a doctorate in social psychology, that they don't understand? What are some misconceptions or things that that you can apply because of your education and your pedigree?
Well, one of the tenets is that when you are marketing and advertising to people, you want to connect with them at an emotional level. And storytelling and narrative, of course, is important. Everyone knows that. But typically people think, well, you just tell the story of how the product is useful. What are the features? What is the cost? When in reality, if you go deeper into why it's meaningful in their lives, why it's going to make them feel better as a person, why it'll make them be better as a dad, why it connects to their ego as a CEO or as a leader, you'll have a more potent communications. So we have tools to go very deep. One of them is called laddering, where we get to the lower level. And when you also have those insights, a new product may emerge, a new idea, a new concept. And so that kind of research can be extremely useful in understanding in depth what your customer or your customers are like.
Mm-hmm. Any concrete stories about somebody who came to you saying, "Yeah, this is how we're telling the story now," and then you did this laddering, and you realize, "Oh, we should talk about it this way," and it worked much better. These kinds of stories are always fun if you have something top of mind.
There's one example that I think is relevant. Toyota came to us with a program. It was we've been working with Toyota for the last 15 years in different areas, and Lexus, the car company.
Yeah.
They put out an RFP. We won it. They wanted to advertise along with Sirius XM, which is in the vehicles, as you probably know. They wanted to advertise the Camry and the RAV4 as hybrids. Now, the obvious would be to share, well, why a hybrid is a good idea. We knew that the hesitations around how hybrids had to do with they have power. Is it a hassle to do? What's my experience going to be like in terms of the distance I can go, et cetera? And instead of making it a rational sell, we found an influencer that we thought could really tell the story better. Her name is Katya Etchezarena. She's an influencer. She's very young. She's 28, so she was attracted to Gen A and Gen Z in the Gen Z folks. And the theme of the campaign is we're all hybrids.
Mm.
So she talked about being an electrical engineer and the first Mexican-born woman to go into space. Two separate things. And, we all have 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts of ourselves. Sometimes we don't show up with them.
Right.
And when you drive a car that's a hybrid, as I do, you actually go farther because the gas engine kicks in on the electric side, right? So you can go farther in space. You actually also get the same performance. We talk about the thrust in the space. We show the
Right.
rocket shot. So there are nice ways as metaphors to talk about the benefits of hybrid. And then she talks about being a woman in space and how meaningful it was for her. So that was a very potent and effective campaign. We also created a filter on Facebook where you could just find out, are you a RAV4 person or are you a Camry person?
Right. Right.
It was a fun exercise. Then we got over 8 million views of the videos. It really worked to move the needle on the hybrid vehicles. So it was a little deeper than what you might have thought the obvious would be about describing a hybrid.
Yeah. Yeah, you can, that makes a lot of sense. That phrase, that's gold, right? We are all hybrids.
Right.
Um, and anyway, building off of that, I like that story a lot. So, Renee, are you still running Fraser Communications kind of day to day, or because you also have this radio show? Tell us a little bit about the radio show and where's your primary focus?
I do still run the company, but, at a very high level. I'm not the day-to-day person on any of our accounts. I tend to be the outside person, and I bring in new opportunities. We're looking at brand positioning for some large nonprofits. I guide that. We're doing a national project for the Mars Corporation. I guide that, but I have a team that implements. And then we have 10 other clients for which we do regular media buying and planning. So I stay in tune, but I'm not doing any of the day-to-day work. The radio show is really close to my heart. It's called the Dr. Renee Fraser Show. And I'm now on KARE, which is the #1 radio station in Los Angeles, which is exciting. I have decided that one of the vehicles or the reasons I do radio, it's a vehicle for sharing information that can be useful to everyone. But I'm particularly interested in helping women become greater leaders. So I feature women who've been leaders. I bring on special speakers. I had Brene Brown on the show to talk about leadership. And I use it as a way to personalize it, build in that emotional narrative, not make it too rigorous like a book might be, but to share keen insights and particularly emphasizing the mistakes that we make, because I think it's important for all of us to admit to be vulnerable and to be authentic in the communication. So the radio is a great vehicle for that. And I truly enjoy learning from that. It runs once a week and it's available on our website, FraserCommunications.com. It's also on Spotify and Apple.
I mean, I'm making a connection back in what you're talking about too. There's a lot of heart in that, right? I think there's business in that too. It's probably not, doesn't hurt, but there's a lot of heart in that because it kind of harkens back to what we were just talking about. The best marketing is connected to the personal, and so clearly that's a big, there's a lot of heart in what you're doing there with the radio show. Do you find it to be? Is it something that attracts new customers? Do you find it to be useful that way as well?
It hasn't really got me customers, to be truthful. It's a passion project. I believe in leading with purpose.
Right.
And I'm sure you've experienced this. When you're passionate about what you do and enthusiastic, that attracts people. And of course, people like to work with people they like. I'm pretty open about being an advocate for women leaders, not to the extent that I want to, diminish men, just that women there's been some social components that keep women in a more submissive role. And I believe it's important to highlight what are their possibilities and help them with opportunities. As I said, it applies to men as well as women. So it really is a purpose-driven effort. I will occasionally have clients on when they want to share key information. But to me, it's a passion project to bring good news into the world and to give tips and advice to people. I think it's important to think about what do we leave behind, not just what we're doing, but what's the legacy we're leaving? And it shouldn't just be about making money, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it reminds me a little bit of the people I talk to who kind of have all of their eggs in their business basket, you know. And
Yeah.
so, sometimes running a company is exciting and fun. Sometimes it's terrible.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and so if that's the only if that's the main thing you have going on, I mean, it's always going to be a very significant part of what a person has going on. But you're kind of a little more emotionally diversified. That's
I agree. I agree. Let me mention two other things. I mean, one, of course, is family.
sure.
And of course, many people have a sporting activity or something they engage in that gives them the real pleasure and the oxycontin, et cetera, in the brain, which is important. So I think that's critical. We could talk about that later, but this whole idea of balance and being able to have your full self is really important. But the other thing I was going to mention throughout my career, I've served on nonprofit boards.
Mm,
And that's another way I feel like I'm making a difference. And I would highly recommend that. That has gotten me new business. That's
right.
gotten me clients. On a board, you can demonstrate your expertise, talk about marketing. How are we going to measure the effectiveness of this program? Have we really used social media effectively? And people hear you and say, boy, she really knows how to use the tools appropriately. Maybe I should bring her into my company. So being on nonprofit boards, like I'm on the Red Cross board, I've been on the United Way board and the Girl Scouts boards. I think those are important opportunities for feeling meaning in your life, knowing you're having an impact. Because you're absolutely right. Being an entrepreneur, oh, there are ups and there are downs. The good news is having done it for 25 years, I see the downs and then I know there'll be an up. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's hard and it's very lonely, as you said. So I do agree with you. You ought to diversify the the areas you're in to give you more pleasure and more meaning in your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It brings some stability. Because not everything is going down at the same time usually. It's
That's true.
yeah.
It's true.
Question for you. So, what are some of the things that you would say? I mean, you've been at this for a while, but we're still, we're always growing. Like, in what ways are you growing right now? Like, what are some of the things you're learning about yourself, or you feel challenged, or kind of what what your next level is? What?
Well, it's a good question. I'm always learning. I'm reading The Ride of a Lifetime, Bob Iger's book about being at Disney. I learn through reading. I do a lot of that, New York Times, et cetera. I listen to Freakonomics and The Economist. I'm trying to keep my mind active and understanding what's going on today, as well as the ways of thinking about it. Uh, but the area I'm growing in is trying to better understand AI and to effectively work with the younger generation. They've evolved and grown up in a very different social setting, obviously native to the internet, very familiar with iPhones, not necessarily as interested in having eye-to-eye contact in conversations. It's better to put it in a text or an email, right, or DM a person. And so I'm learning to adapt to that as a leader. That's been a real challenge.
Mm,
The other thing that I've learned in the last 5 years is to show my vulnerability. I grew up in an age where I was running a division for Bozell and Jacobs, a big multinational ad agency. I ran the Pacific Rim for them. Only woman running a division, at the senior level in the company. All the people I had as models were men. And it was know your stuff, command and control. Don't ask questions. Show how strong you are. And as a woman, look good and be smart. There were a lot of pressures.
right.
Uh, I adapted and adopted that, including the shoulder pads and all of that, the regalia. But I've learned in recent times that that's not the style. People want emotional intelligence, and you've got to show your vulnerability in a proper way. You don't want to spend, a 30-minute call with 20 minutes complaining about your personal life or having your children all over you as you're talking and presenting in a meeting. There's a place for some of that, but you have to be willing to show that component. And deciding when you're vulnerable, I think, is a tough thing for some leaders.
What have you learned is, how have you decided to handle that? Like, what rules of thumb do you use? I mean, what you said is that it's a tough thing. So it's tough emotionally, but also tough to know the time and the place. I guess I'm curious what your ruminations are on how to make the call.
It's a good question. One valuable guide is your own personal values, what's important to you. And sharing a vulnerability that connects to that value, I think, is a way to choose to do it. I'll give an example in a moment. The second thing is, what are the lessons you want to convey to people? So, for example, I do want my employees to feel like they could bring their whole person, that they could take time off when they need to for their families or their own health. But in return, I expect a high level of trust and that they get the work done. If they're out, from 3 to 5 because they have to go to the dentist, then maybe at 6 to 9, they're also working. They meet the objective, right? It's not so much about the hours, but getting the work done. So I will share examples of where I had to leave early for something, and then talk about how I made up for it at another point in time.
Right.
And it's a subtle way of reminding them that there is that trade-off and that it's okay to take the time off for those things. So that's one way to show vulnerability. I'm also open about, some health issues, not all. Just to mention that I'm, concerned about it, working on it. I didn't get to the gym today. I'm frustrated by that. I wish I had, that kind of thing.
Right.
Because I know they can relate to that, and it's a value that I have that I'm going back to that first point that I made. You really should be strategic about what you share, I think, intentional and strategic, as opposed to, it's Monday morning and a crappy weekend. I'll just be vulnerable and tell everybody that, maybe not. But
What do you think the risks are for people who are listening who are on the other side, perhaps, of the let it all hang out? What do you think that they need to think about? Um, yeah. What are the risks?
yeah, there are a couple. First of all, the cadence of being vulnerable and showing those things. If you're too often speaking about it, maybe it's twice a month or 3 times a month. It's not every week. You're perceived as weak or a whiner, right? What's wrong with this person? Because you're the leader, right?
Mm.
Just like we have to come in with a strong smile and an optimism, especially with all the changes we're facing, right? The changes at the federal government level, all these changes. You have to feel like we're going to make it through. We're going to have to rethink what we do. And of course, with AI, it's created a whole nother set of uncertainties. But you have to have confidence. So too much vulnerability would show a lack of understanding and definition of where we're going to go in the future. So you're mindful of that. Again, you've got to think strategically. What's the end goal? What am I trying to convey to people? And I don't want to be too Machiavellian in the sense that you manipulate.
Yeah.
But to some extent, you do have to consider that. Yeah.
Reminds me a little bit. I've been multiple situations over the years where it's in a group meeting, a team meeting, and the CEO was vulnerable about feeling uncertain and worried.
Oh, about the company?
Yeah,
I don't think
and I
that's
feel like it's too much. It's like, you know what, that's a little bit, but
yeah.
people, you can't get too morose. People need to
No, people,
know that it's going to be
especially,
okay.
yeah, exactly. We recently, because of the federal government changes, had 3 of our contracts that were, going to be extended, got canceled.
Ah,
Nothing to do with our work. So I had to announce that. But then so I announced it, said it was understandable, but here's what we're doing
right.
with that downturn. We've turned up this new business effort. We're going to follow up with these people. I'm very confident we'll win that business and it will backfill for us. Because otherwise, people's minds go, oh my God, all these bad things and what could happen, and maybe I should look for a job. So I always pair any negative with a positive solution, that I've come up with and that the team has come up with.
Because the reality is that is true. That it almost certainly will be okay. And I think you hit on something interesting that when you're in a leadership position, what you say, you're kind of responsible for what you say, but also on how people are going to take it. And so you have to be thinking about that and taking responsibility for the implications of or
Have a
the
positive.
possible the rabbit trails or the anxieties and the fears, and say, this is what I'm not saying, all
Yeah,
these sorts of things. So
yes,
it's not
yeah,
really manipulation, because it's actually more true what you're leading them towards,
that's
by filtering maybe all of the negativity that you're feeling, because even that it's not
right.
actually that bad
Yeah,
at some level, right? Even if you're
yeah,
feeling that way.
that's right. That's right. You just want to be very thoughtful about it and think through what are the ramifications and the age group of your employees, right? They're young, they live paycheck to paycheck. They hear other things in the environment, see other layoffs happening. So
Right.
just be cognizant. In that particular case, we did have to make a couple of layoffs, but when they were over, they were over. And I said that to make it very clear. And of course, you try to do them, in a very fast paced way. And we did it very thoroughly with good severance, all of that. But I agree with you. You have to be very intentional and thoughtful. How is this going to land? And then listen, we have an open door policy, right? So they can come in and share their concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. The living paycheck to paycheck thing is interesting too. It's hard to, how many, every stage of life, there's and career and is, it does, we do have to work to put ourselves in other people's shoes and realize, because if you look back, like, yeah, and that was the way it was at a certain time, for me too.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I remember those days. And, many of my employees have kids. They're going to go to college. They're saving money. There's all kinds of pressures on them. So you just have to be cognizant of that. One of the things as a psychologist that I've learned is you really have to see it through the mind of other people. And in our business, we create these things called personas, the mindsets of different customers, and share those. We use some insight research to develop those. And then the clients use those as a way to identify what's the right messaging, how do I reach those people, what are the new products, new ways they would like to use our product, our brand. So putting yourself in the mind of others is a really important part of being a good leader. I'm not sure it comes necessarily naturally, especially if you're like a tech or a scientist. You may really emphasize the rational and your own experience, and it's a very valuable tool as you innovate. But when you manage people, you really need to think through what are the mindsets that I'm dealing with in my employees, my team.
That reminds me, I was going to ask you about whether or not you went to get your PhD in social psychology in order to go into marketing, or did you have how did that all come about?
Yeah, I did not expect it.
Yeah.
So not at an overt level. So my dad was in the advertising business. I'm the oldest born, so it would be likely it would the eldest, so it would be likely that I would follow. But we did a daughter at work day, and I said, "Dad, all those people are so smart. Why aren't they solving the world's problems? I don't understand. I'm never going to go into advertising."
Never say that.
And I know, never say never, right? And then I went to college. One of the professors told me, "You really ought to get a PhD in psychology." I was going to go to law, but they said, "You've got an affinity for this." So I went ahead and got the PhD, and they were training me to be a professor. That's what you learn to be when you're most PhD programs. And that was 25 years ago.
Hmm.
And I was teaching. I love teaching. Being in front of students, learning from them was just so exciting. But then after I graduated, got my PhD, I married a professor. Not allowed, maybe, but but it was the way that happened. And when I married him, I realized if both of us are competing for tenure and living off of these salaries, I better do something else.
Mm.
So I looked around, and market research was great for psychologists and social psychologists. Started off in that field. Sure enough, an ad agency brought me in, recruited me to run their strategic planning and do advertising research for them around the world, which was great. Then I got fired as a result of just a downsizing. I actually ran the division. I ran that Pacific division, $150 million. I was the only woman at the top. Yeah, I wasn't 40. Knowing, as a business owner, it's harder to fire an older person than it is a younger person, right? So anyway, it was my opportunity to start my own company. And I thought, this is my shot. I wasn't trained to be an entrepreneur, but I thought, this is it. Let's see what I could do. And having run a division, I had about 140 people. I understood the role of HR, the finance role, the marketing role, operations, media, digital. So I understood how to replicate that at a
Right.
food chain level. And it was a success. Who knew? I didn't know. I just gave it a shot.
Yeah, it is always interesting. And well, thank goodness that our life, we don't know exactly how it's going to unfold, right?
I hear
Uh,
that on every single interview I've done with successful women and men.
uh,
That I've done over 100 interviews of CEOs, and it's it's never really been a linear path.
right.
And the thing I like to say that I hear is, the Chinese symbol for luck is opportunity meets preparation.
Mm.
So you prepare yourself, you get smart about something, you put yourself in situations, and wow, that connection worked. Oh, it took me to the next level. I got a thing I never expected. Boy, was I lucky. Were you lucky, or were you in the right place with the right preparation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as people plan their careers and they're thinking, really, I'm looking for my next opportunity and my next thing, think about preparing, obviously the world we're in, getting smart about AI, understanding more how to utilize tech tools, whatever it may be, and then put yourself in the right networking opportunities. And lo and behold, luck can occur and you get a new opportunity. Because you're right, rarely is it linear, rarely is it a path that you've decided. You've got to leave yourself open to opportunities that come your way. And sometimes you take ones that don't turn out, sometimes they do. The other thing I'll say that I'm sure you've experienced is you plant seeds and you never know when they're going to pop up. Right. And I used to think, well, I've been cultivating, it's 6 months, nothing's come. Well, a year later it comes, 2 years later. You have to have faith that as you build those relationships, they will pay you back in some way. And I believe there is some karma out there. So
Hmm.
doing good things in the world can benefit you in the long run.
So Renee, let me ask you a question about that. The last thing that you said. Um, there's this. So what you said is, so plant seeds, and even if they don't bear fruit right away, have faith that eventually they will. And I think that that's true. And also, um, sometimes, well, how do you tell the difference between that and beating your head against a wall that's
Mhm.
never going to give? Right? Sometimes, at least for me, and I think perhaps others, it's not always clear what
That's
situation we're in.
that's
What
true.
do you think are some of the telltale signs that tell you one way or the other?
Well, this is going to sound odd, maybe, but your gut.
Mm,
I think when you've been pursuing something for some time, especially if it's an individual in terms of making a connection and cultivating a relationship, uh, you've got to read how they're interpreting what you're saying and if they pursue it with you or they're engaged. When I cultivate people in relationships, I'm not always telling them about me. I try to find connections. I might send them a book. I might send an article or a podcast. I might invite them to an event. I learn about their kids or about they love skiing. We talk about that. So I try to build a more complete relationship with them, and I think that lasts longer. And I can usually tell if there's a genuine interest or they're dismissing me. I have been in other situations so where you're pitching for funding, right, and you're not getting anywhere, and you're frustrated. I think when you've done it for some time, and time period, can vary. There's got to be a stepping back and say, is this ever going to work? Am I getting any input that this is valuable? Should I pivot? And I think asking people who are close to you is a good way. You could also talk about, I'm feeling this, but I'm not. They say, no, you're always down on yourself. You should
right.
be optimistic. Somebody who you trust could be an outside voice, often sees you better than you see yourself.
So one of the challenges that I have is that I can always usually see both sides of a story or a situation. And so I think, again, what you just said is true. And also, um, people around you can be kind of quick to say, like, well, it's not working, you just do something different. And so you kind of have to pick even then, well, I mean, and then not even, I mean, naysayers are one thing, right? Naysayers are you got to be real careful about listening to naysayers.
Right.
But even well-intentioned people who are worried about you, can tell you can kind of encourage you to throw in the towel before you should. And so it's an ongoing thing for me. I'm a very stubborn person. I like to win even against all odds. Actually,
Ah.
if the odds are stacked against me, I prefer that. And so what that means is that I'm often in a situation I often lose
Yeah.
because the odds are
Well,
stacked against. That's
that's right.
by
That's right.
definition I'm choosing that situation. And so
And so, some people who are less of that nature will just tell you throw in the towel.
yeah,
They see you as too persistent, right? Too stubborn.
right.
So you got to tap into your own gut as to whether or not. I mean, there's no one answer here, Scott. It's a matter of how you feel about it, and sometimes it's also taking a pause, right? Really putting it on pause, like for a month. Does anything come back? Does anything come to you? That notion of letting your mind quiet down and pausing is a really important thing. As you probably know, we think about things at a subconscious level that can be really valuable. Einstein used to go for walks and play the violin when he got stuck on things. He knew his mind had to simmer right with the ideas. And I think that could also be in the case where you're pursuing something and you're so intensely driven by it. Just taking a pause could give you more insight that comes to you, and maybe even a new variant, not to walk away from it, but a new way to approach it. So another tactic to use.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Problem solving, the showers are great for me in terms of
Yeah,
problem solving, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, uh, and it also, I think another indicator that it's not time to throw in the towel is that you still have new ideas. You still have some
Oh,
energy for it. There's kind of,
oh, yeah.
if you kind of feel like you are tired of it, but then you wake up the next morning or the next week or the next month and you think, well, maybe that would work, and you kind of come back to if you can't help it, still, that there's a
Right.
there's a quite a lot, I think, of magic is created by people who do stuff for so long, and it's not because they're incredibly disciplined, it's because they can't help it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They can't
They're
help it.
driven by it.
They
Right.
just stay at it because there's it's got its hooks into them in this way that they can't stop, and it either drives them insane or they create something magical.
Yeah. 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 More power to them. I think that's wonderful. If you've got something that intense inside of you that you feel like you need to bring to the world, I think that's great. I'm more of an adapter, and learning. Like we're bringing AI right into the marketing tools. We're looking at, do we turn these personas into avatars and
Right.
agents that then can answer questions instead of going out and talking to consumers like we do in primary research? Maybe, I tend to like go to real people, but I think there's a way to test, right? Of measuring real people's attitudes and then asking the creative agent and seeing how close the answers align. It certainly would be efficient to have these kinds of persona avatars. So we're looking at that. So we're looking at new tools that I wouldn't have done 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and obviously adapting to the times.
Oh, Renee, that would be so interesting. I'm glad to hear that you're working on that, right? Because I'm sure either you could do it internally or somebody else who is already saying, yeah, personas, interrogating a AI persona is just as good. Like, okay, well, let's have a bake off.
Right,
That would
exactly,
be really cool,
exactly.
especially if there's some relatively objective way of measuring the end result. Which would there be? Uh,
Well, and in a simple, we're looking at a new concept in the veterinary health arena. So we could test it with real people and then and then create the personas and have them test it and see what's the preference, right? What's the appeal? Who would buy it? Who wouldn't? And then see if it matches up. So you'd want to have a real world data set to compare to the AI predictions and look at those. And when I say data set, I mean really responses to some key questions. They're probably purchase intent, things of that nature. So I do think we could construct that. Now,
I think you're right. I think that, if you were to find that especially if it was totally firewalled. There's no data from the interviews of people
Right,
available to the AI.
right.
And if it turned out that the AI was mostly right, came back with the same recommendations after interviewing the artificial personas, well, that would be interesting. I I would guess that the humans get richer information, but let me know how it goes.
I will let you know. Well, and no doubt you could probe and get richer information from people, especially if you go deep. But if you're just looking for a quick read, what percentage of people are going to be interested in this? Do I need to go out and spend $40,000 on a study, or can I use my agent, my consumer agent, as a litmus test for
Mhm.
at least going further? It's interesting. We're just now starting to deal with this and to identify. And you're right. There's some companies that we're looking for to help us with it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, but I think it's an avenue even for a business to create a business to do that for clients. And my background in research and psychology makes it a really good fit that we can create because creating the agent, looking at the social media, right? Looking at what media habits you've got to create the mindset of the persona with data, and it has to be contemporary, right? It's not like you collected it in 25 and now it's 26 and things have happened and you're asking them to react to it in 26. Pricing has changed, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of aspects to it, but it's an interesting. So your point was, do you stay on one track, or I adapt rather than? But at the heart of it, there's a certain level of passion and rigor and discipline and expertise that gets brought to these things, as you
Mhm.
might expect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, time is flying here. I do have one last question for you. Is just around how you organize Fraser Communications with regards to. Do you have a senior leadership team that kind of
Yeah.
guides the ship, and how do you keep them aligned? Do you have an operational system that you use? What's your approach in that area?
We had a task force to look at we use NetSuite for accounting. We use Slack and we use Teams. We use Teams on a regular basis for communication. Uh, but we have not adopted a project management tool. What happens to us, as I mentioned, we have 12 or 13 clients that want us to use theirs, right? We're in different
Right.
ones for different clients. So right now we use our own, systems for communicating via Teams and email. But I'm looking at new ways to organize that. The senior team is great. The hardest part is keeping them all informed what everyone else is doing,
Mm. Hmm.
because they have assigned clients, right? You'll have an account lead, a coordinator, a project manager, and they manage that account. They tap into the media department to choose what media. They tap into the research and strategy department. They tap into the creative department, and then they produce it. And then the other team is doing a whole nother campaign. One's talking about how to buy car insurance. Another one's electric vehicles. Another one's getting them to buy those hybrids. So it's the force sharing and learning from each other. We had one of those meetings, so I'd bring everybody together. They share examples. Uh, we talked about we're using texting as a tool to add to the media plate. And in one client's case, it's really been effective. When we text and people respond, we actually get their phone numbers. The client follows up with the phone number, and
Right.
they've converted people. So, some of my other client account people said, "Oh, we could maybe use that." So they learned. The cross learning is hard. My folks are all remote, so that's another part of it. There's no copy, machine where they're chatting away. So I have to create that. And frankly, that's one of the challenges of being a leader. How do you create culture and this cross breeding and cross selling in an environment like that? And it's difficult. It's a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah, it's remote is has such wonderful things about it, and of course some obviously some challenges that go along with it as well. So do you have a senior leadership team that works on the business primarily, or are they all kind of like they're engaged with clients?
They're engaged with clients.
Okay.
Yeah, about 25% of their role is on the business, administrative work, oversight on, some of the financial area. But then about 75% of their time is with clients as well. We're not large enough to have an infrastructure of people that are just managing.
Right.
And I think the kind of people that I've attracted to the company want to roll up their sleeves and be proud of doing the work. If anything, what I'm finding is the younger people I'm bringing in, they want to create the videos. They want to come up with the ideas. Well, you're the account person. The creative department comes up with that. No, I can come up with that. So, all right, let's find a way that your ideas, we don't want to just take the obvious. We've got to take it to a deeper level. How do we do that? So I've adapted, the old model was these silos and these different groups.
Yeah.
I've seen more of the crossover now, and I'm encouraging it a whole new way.
Yeah, that's happening in other types of businesses as well. I work with a lot of software companies, and so one obvious example of that is you have a product manager and you have the engineering team.
Right.
But now the product manager doesn't just need to create mock-ups or wireframes. They can create prototypes.
Right.
They're not necessarily usable. The engineering team can't necessarily just copy and paste that prototype, but the roles are collapsing and we're getting closer and closer to each other in a way, which I agree. Communication is, lapses in communication are very expensive. And so everything we can do to make it so people are close.
Right.
So
What's interesting about the example is how do you gain collaboration? Because I think in this case, you're mentioning engineering might be a little defensive. Like, that's our domain. Why are you doing this? That's what I see in my business. And so you have to encourage collaboration and credit, incentives and or recognition so that people see it as acceptable to do that. But it's been hard. People from the older domain of the past want to keep it separate. And I've said, no, we're going to break down those walls. You got to get people used to change. And of course, that's a whole nother thing, right? Change, transformation in our business is a tough one. And I'm glad to hear, though, that you're seeing the same thing. That encourages me that it's just not my business or something.
it's not just your business. It's not just your business. Yeah. Well, Renee, I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together. Thank you for coming on the show today. All the best with Fraser Communications, and I'll keep my eyes open for maybe I'll see a commercial or two that you were involved in.
Absolutely. You'll see something, I'm sure. We'll be pushing it towards you on YouTube or on over-the-top television or through your social media feeds. Where
I was going to say probably Amazon Prime and Disney are showing me a lot more and more ads. And so
I know. Yeah, that's the way of the world, isn't it? It was free. Then I signed up and now I'm getting ads. Yeah. Most of my colleagues pay not to see the ads. I stick with the ads. I've got to learn.
Yeah, that's right. It's
but thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, it's for my business. Thanks for taking the time. I enjoyed talking with you, and I'll look forward to hearing how the podcast does and hoping people will listen to the Dr. Renee Fraser Show on Spotify. Should be great.
Yeah, check out the show and also check out Fraser Communications on the web.
That's right.
Thanks, Renee.
Thank you. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Founders, if you're struggling to manage goals and execution with your team, HabitStack can help with that. I'm Scott Ward. Thank you for joining me on the HabitStack Podcast.